Hey friends, welcome to the second week of devotionals in our study on 2 Corinthians. One of the most prominent features of 2 Corinthians is that the Apostle Paul shows great transparency and personal vulnerability. He opens up about the inner turmoil that he's experiencing in his current missions work near Ephesus. He's opening up about the grief that has been caused because of the strained relationship that he has with this particular church. He opens up about his attempts to make things right with this church. In fact, he's had a short visit that he thought would help. He's written a letter that is now lost to history, but his best attempts actually have only made things worse. Therefore, he writes this particular letter to try and reconnect that relationship. And I love this about Paul. He does not present himself as a superhero. He does not present himself as someone who is invincible to regular life's problems. And we can easily relate to Paul. Sometimes I think we put apostles on pedestals that they really never asked for themselves. They were certainly called of God. They spent time with Christ personally. But on the flip side of that, they were weak, they were vulnerable, they faced the same struggles, sorrows, and difficulties that we do. In fact, Paul in chapter 1 verses 8 through 11 tells us that he was in despair. He was dreading life itself. He lost his sense of purpose. There was a cloud of depression that had settled in on him, and he wasn't sure exactly what to do. So he enlisted the Corinthians to pray and others to pray for him. And as he began to walk out of that tunnel of depression, he realized that relying on the God who comforts everyone and who raises the dead is the key to deliverance in the middle of the situation that he's experiencing. And so as he sets himself up as an example for us, he's saying, listen, I've suffered emotional turmoil. I've suffered physically. Christ has seen me through. Put your trust in Christ. Follow in my footsteps. He has that cloud of doubt covering him, but he turns to Christ in the middle of that doubt, and he trusts in him and finds relief. He sank into the same depths of despair that sometimes you and I do, but he was lifted up in the middle of it because of Christ. And for Paul, exiting that tunnel of despair really was about learning to trust God more fully, learning to rely on God more fully for his emotional strength, for his spiritual strength, to reach out to friends beyond and seek prayer, as we find at the end of the first section of chapter 1. So as we prayerfully read this next section, begin to study a little bit further into the book, let's make sure that we open up our hearts and minds to allow Paul's emotions to step off the page so that we hear a conversation with him and we sense the depths of sorrow and difficulty that he's experiencing. Let's embrace his vulnerability. Let's embrace the almost psalm-like cries that he makes to God in the middle of this circumstance. Let's allow his words to connect us with his feelings so we can get a broader understanding, more of a 360-degree experience of 2 Corinthians. And let's realize that turning to God in our times of difficulty and understanding and embracing despair is sacred, it's holy, and it's healthy. And let's also remember that these early verses help us to better understand what goes on later on, especially Paul's interaction with God in chapter 12, where he cries out to God for relief 3 times, and God comes back with this answer: my grace is all you need, and my strength works best in weakness. Read with an ear to emotion this week as you read 2 Corinthians. Be blessed, friends.